a literal age-old conflict of good and evil, sharing and personal liberty, totalitarianism and freedom, communism versus democracy. Let's have a rundown of our competitors. Democracy is an ancient concept dating back to the Greeks, but it was revitalized after the War of Independence. On the other side, we have communism, another ancient concept, but was fully realized by the USSR. It's a basically sharing is caring mentality. From the beginning, these two nations had resentment for each other, but this resentment hit an all-time high after World War II, the Iron Curtain, and the creation of NATO and the Warsaw Pact. The war wasn't a traditional war. It was made up of proxy conflicts, espionage, and sabotage. Ultimately, the former would be undone, and the Union would break up to become almost in parallel of its former self. The Red Scare can be exaggerated to the rounding up and killing of political commissars, but it was really the weeding out of USSR's sympathizers with fear and dangerous paranoia in the USA. In schools, children were taught that communism was the devil's child and Marx was the devil. This is all started by former Marine and Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy. In the end, the idea was sound, but after getting the arts involved, it just really became a tattletale fest with no real success. The Iron Curtain was the political, ideological, and military border between the Warsaw Pact and NATO. The U.S.'s competition with the USSR for technological dominance in space, the space race, was what put the U.S. on the moon and sent the first men and women to space. This new front for the Cold War would prove that capitalism would only go up and communism would stay right where it was. An arms race is a rapid increase in the quantity or quality of instruments of military power by countries in peacetime. In our case, the arms race was of nuclear missiles and other nuclear weapons between the USSR and the United States. A world superpower can be a colonial empire, a religious empire, but in our case it would be the US and USSR. They were world superpowers because of how big countries they were, but also because of their military might. The 13 days the Cuban Missile Crisis lasted was the 13 days of military standoff between the US and the Soviet Union. But it started when, in 1961, the US tried to oust the communist government, but it was unsuccessful. After this, the communist leader of Cuba, Fidel Castro, was concerned and reached out to Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. With the arrival of another communist country, Khrushchev happily complied and asked Fidel if he could put his missiles there. Fidel, of course, complied. Being concerned that there were missiles so close to the US, JFK decided to blockade all imports and exports. On October 16th, the Soviet Union officially sent out their ships carrying the missiles to be placed in Cuba. On October 20th, the US and Soviet ships would finally meet to have a standoff that would last till about October 28th. Then negotiations happened. The Soviets said that they'd take their missiles out of Cuba if the US and NATO took their missiles out of Turkey. The US complied.